Hello and welcome to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups from the folks that are building them. It's me, your host, Becca Skutak, and sadly, I'm flying solo in this interview, so there will be no fun and witty banter after the conversation. We missed Dom a lot in this episode, but of course, I was not completely alone. For this episode, I talked with both Carly Zakin and Danielle Weisberg, co-founders and co-CEOs of theSkimm, which is a digital media company that aggregates the news in a multitude of newsletters geared toward millennial women. It was a really fun conversation. We got into things like how they divide responsibilities as co-CEOs, how they've weathered a bumpy media landscape over the past decade, and what they would do differently if they could go back and do it all over again. Let's get right into it. Hey, Carly, how's it going?
Good. Thanks so much for having us.
Oh, thanks so much for coming on. Danielle, how are you doing?
Hey, Becca. Thanks so much for having us. Excited to be here.
Definitely. No, I'm really excited to dive into this one. It's so rare on both this podcast as well as in general that working for a digital media company, I get to kind of talk to another digital media company. So I think that might be a good place to dive in. Why don't you guys start by just telling us a little bit about theSkimm?
Sure. Well, we started theSkimm from our living room couch in 2012. And it has become and grown from there into a digital media company dedicated to giving women the information they need to navigate life's most important decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious because I know before we got on this call, I looked into it a little bit because I was trying to remember the timeline of this. Knowing you guys launched in 2012, certain other media companies focus at women like Bustle. And I was like, did those come first? Did you guys come first? And it seems like you all launched within the span of a couple of years. And I'm curious, when you guys were thinking about getting started, why did you guys decide to launch theSkimm? And what hole in the digital media landscape were you guys looking to fill with this?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, Danielle and I came from working at a legacy media company that it's funny to kind of go back in time. There were, at the time, what every kind of company town hall was about was like digital media and like new media. So, that kind of ages us a little bit. But we also literally never heard the word millennial. So imagine that, like it wasn't overused yet at all. But what we did know very quickly was like these town halls we were going to, the programming that we were even working on was not reaching our friends. And the new media that had kind of popped up, our friends were not engaging with. And so when we kind of like actually literally Googled like millennial, because that's our demographic, and we really understood the stats of millennial women and the unique power of our generation, which honestly only compounded over time. We were like, oh, like this is a huge business opportunity. This is the generation that's about, at the time, about to become the breadwinner. Now she is the breadwinner that is about to be influencing $1 trillion annually. Now she is influencing $3.5 trillion annually. We were like, this is going to be the most important demographic to our economy. Why is there not information being not just like catered to her, but catered to her daily routines? That's why we were like, we have to do this in email. It has to be first thing in the morning at the time. And that really kind of gave us the focus to start what then became the Daily Skimm.
I was just going to say, Becca, when you talk about, it's so funny in terms of like entrepreneurship and years, right? Because for us, your question was around who started first. Given that, we started it from our couch and we bootstrapped it for a long time. So we didn't hire a team until we were almost 2 years in. And so I think that there was a real authenticity to our story and to the fact that there were two women behind a new kind of venture in media. And that felt very different than companies that were also tackling women's lifestyle, but didn't necessarily have that same sort of founding story. The other thing is that we started from a news background, and theSkimm has really grown to serve her and meet her where she is, from entering the workforce through all of the stages of adulthood. But when we started, it was really, the idea was recreating morning television in a much more digital-friendly environment. What do you use to wake up? What do you need to know in those few minutes before you jump out of bed or hit the snooze, but hopefully we were really part of that one-eyed open routine and that habitual sense of feeling like a friend starting your morning. We were putting in front of our audience and getting them at that moment in time through a newsletter was a really different part of the digital media landscape. At the time, there was still a lot of kind of these print brands that we had all grown up with and had a lot of affinity for. And then you had other companies starting that were going after the same audience, but going after her from much more of the fashion lifestyle angle. And our angle was really about what are the gray spaces? What are the things that she needs to feel like she can trust someone to get information and no one is serving her, specifically her? And that's really where we focused and we grew from there.
And since you've already brought it up a few times, the fact that you guys really launched this through a newsletter format is super interesting because thinking about it now, it's like everyone has newsletters. Newsletters are everywhere. But back then, I mean, like I wasn't reading newsletters back then. It just wasn't a thing that was as common. Was starting this as a newsletter always the plan? Or did you guys think of other potential ways to get started and add it on later? Sort of like, how did you guys land on newsletter being like the right format for this?
Yeah. So you're right. At the time, there were very few newsletters that people enjoyed receiving or companies were using. So we do like to say we started that trend for sure. But what we did realize, as Danielle just mentioned, like the one-eyed open routine was like the key. We were like, how do we reach our friends? What our friends represent? And we knew we were like, okay, first thing we all do, like wake up. I had snoozed many times, but like I look at my phone literally with one eye open. I'm like, did anyone any family or friend like text me something important? I would check my email to make sure like my boss at the time didn't email me or, like my mom didn't email me something. And from there, like get up, do my thing, and then like actually like sign on and like, look at the other stuff. And so we were like, we have to be a part of that first part, the before you get out of bed part. And so we knew we were like, well, the way to do that is it has to read like it's from your friend, like from your best friend. And it's got to be an email from your friend. And so that's why we did email. That was kind of the origination of, or the origin rather, of the voice of theSkimm, was to make it sound like this is your best friend.
And I think that turned out to be maybe the smartest thing we've ever done, if I'm giving us a lot of credit for making long-term decisions in those first moments of building the company. For years, brands have been built on third-party data. And now we are seeing with Google phasing third-party data out, it's a real issue for a lot of those companies who have been able to scale based off of that. And they're trying to figure out how to maintain and build their audiences. And in the bigger picture, that means brands will be looking at newsletters as a primary way to reach their audience. And, that's something that we're obviously very familiar with. They've been the backbone of our business for many years, which allowed us a really strategic advantage because we weren't subject to the SEO game. We weren't subject to having to build around, a platform. And I'm using Google in that way, but it can also be applied to social algorithms as well. Our business model has always been centered around zero and first party data because we were able to create a direct line of communication with this very sought after audience.
No, and what you mentioned about the newsletter format is so true because I actually was just talking about this with our producer, Maggie, I think literally yesterday. And she was like, how do you start work so early? And I was like, I start work by waking up, opening my phone and reading about 12 newsletters. Then I get up and go to my desk. So it's like, it's very interesting to hear you guys talk about it from that. Cause like being the user on the other side, I'm like, yep, nope, that's correct. Like that's literally how I like engage with the news in the morning. But I also want to take a step back to something you guys said a couple minutes ago regarding that you guys didn't hire for quite a while when you got started and you bootstrapped the company. And it really was sort of this two-woman show for a long time. And I'm curious if you could talk about what that was like, because you hear about other companies like, we were grinding away, we're two engineers doing this and that. But you rarely hear of like a digital media company being like, yep, we just wrote it all ourselves. We built the company at the same time for a couple of years while funding it on our own. What were those first few years like for you guys, both professionally, but also personally trying to get this off the ground?
Danielle, I'll let you take this.
I'm I'm having real flashbacks of the level of exhaustion. I was just thinking it's been a while since we kind of mentally revisited that period. Well, the first thing to know is that we quit our jobs with a couple $1,000s saved up. You know, we were like 25 years old. We had no business background. We had no tech background. And I think that level of naivete was probably the most helpful thing that we had, because we had no clue how hard this was going to be. And I think that's true of any entrepreneur, first-time entrepreneur, but we also had the excitement and the knowledge that there was no safety net. There was no safety net financially, emotionally. It was the two of us in it, and we were the only ones that were going to be advocating for it to get off the ground. So we have raised theSkimm in over 11 years, under $30 million in funding. And we have notable investors, GV, RRE, Greycroft, Disney. At the time when we started, we had raised a small amount of money, which was basically enough for us to pay our WordPress fees and be able to send the newsletter out, design a little bit, and for us to actually be able to quit our jobs to do this. That was it. And with that, everyone talks about like a friends and family round. You know, that was not, I would say we had to pitch. This was like we were new to the game and we had people really believing in us. And that meant a lot. So what that looked like was that we were working around the clock. We slept in shifts. We wrote the newsletter through the night and updated it until it went out at 6 a.m. And then we would get a few hours of sleep. And then we would try to get the business off the ground during the day. And we got very good advice a little bit further along in our journey that when you're building any sort of business, you can either go for audience growth or you can go for revenue growth. We decided to go for audience growth. And that meant to us, because we had no budget for audience acquisition. We had no budget for, thinking through, do we advertise here or there? We would print out t-shirts. If we saw that a celebrity or influencer posted about us, we would print the one-off t-shirt and send it to them.
Oh my God.
We sent it to our friends across the country and just ask them to wear it, when they work out or when they go out for a walk. We did a college tour, which meant that we were not invited to any of these campuses, but we would show up in our Skimm shirts and kind of leave flyers under the door in different dorms or sit in the cafeteria or stand out on the walk. We launched a brand ambassador program that definitely had college-age students, which was amazing, but it was also a lot of women who were interested in entrepreneurship, wanted to be part of the journey, and they helped us really grow it through a grassroots way. So after about a year and a half of doing that and getting a lot of no's when we were trying to raise money, despite this really grassroots viral audience growth story, which we saw in the numbers, we would celebrate like every milestone. We know when we wake up, this is how many people subscribed. And when we went to bed, this is how we ended the day. And that is kind of how we lived and breathed success. So we finally met Homebrew Ventures. We were their first New York investment, and Hunter and Satya were our lead in our seed round. And through that, we were finally able to hire a team, which meant I think we hired 5 or 6 people, got a very, very tiny office above a bar. And that started, the next phase of the journey.
And since you mentioned the investor piece of it too, it sounds like you guys, like you said, you got a lot of no's. Like, what did people think about this idea when you guys were first getting off the ground, especially because you were new to this category? This wasn't something, there was a lot of examples or success stories you could point to in the category already. What kind of feedback did you get as you were going out to pitch?
Well, again, like not to age us, but if you were going to raise money, it was coming from San Francisco. Like there was no venture. I mean, like you could count the 3 funds on your hand of like the venture funds in New York. And there were a few celebrity funds in LA, but the money was in San Francisco, and Silicon Valley hated us. They didn't get it. When we would go, I mean, I honestly, I haven't been able to go back to San Francisco without literally physically remembering the feeling of hearing no. because we were told, you need a technical co-founder. You have to find one. It was large at this time. Like, I don't think we ever pitched a room that had a woman in it. And so what we would hear was, my wife likes this, I think, or let me see if my wife likes it and I'll get back to you. And we're like, is your wife an investor? Like, I'm happy to have her sign up for theSkimm, but like, why is your wife, who we don't know anything about, going to determine whether or not you're going to write us a check?
Right.
We were told that this was not scalable. We were told email was dead. That was my favorite, because that was usually emailed to us. Like they would send us an email that would be like, email is dead. And I'm like, it's amazing you revived it to send us this note. So those were like the main themes of why. And I think there's one other one, which I really love to laugh at today, and certainly laughed at then, is women are a niche market.
Oh, wow.
Why are you focusing on them?
Just a handful of us,
Yeah, it's only like 10 of us. So like, you'd be shocked how many people said that. And so I think because so much of that feedback was so ridiculous to us, that we were like, we don't like this place, Silicon Valley. We're going to just keep going. I think if the feedback had been like, the writing really sucks, or like, you guys like don't seem like you could work together, like maybe we would have like taken it to heart in a different way. But we just so vehemently disagreed or didn't understand the feedback we were getting, that we were just like, we got to keep going. Because, and I think this is where we were lucky that it was, we were in a consumer product space. We would get no's, but then we would get that same day, like, 5,000 people that would sign up. And, we were getting notes from our readers being like, where has this product been all my life? Like, can I be a Skimm ambassador for you? Can I work for you? And so the fact that we were hearing directly from our target user how much they loved it and how sticky this was, and then getting no's from people that weren't our target at all, kept us going.
No, it's so interesting to hear that, because we just did a recent, like a year-end wrap-up episode for 2023. And one of the things that my co-host Dom and I talked about a lot in that is that we felt like every time we talked, and not just to women entrepreneurs either, but mainly women entrepreneurs, it'd be like, oh, I've landed Chipotle as a customer. And VCs are like, I don't think no one wants this. And they're like, I've landed Chipotle as a customer. And VCs are like, oh, no one wants this. And like that clear divide of demand is so interesting. And it still exists today. I hope less so, but it is very interesting to always like hear about more examples of just that weird disconnect with investors.
Yeah.
But one thing I did want to ask you guys about, because I know you guys both worked in the news industry, legacy news companies, before starting theSkimm, but you guys knew each other from prior to that. Maybe if you want to talk about kind of like how you guys met, and did you ever think you guys would start a company together?
We are happy to talk about our meet cute. I think in the beginning, in New York in kind of like 2012, when everyone was starting a company or going to like the meetups to try to meet a business partner, that was one of the advantages that we had. It was like, okay, we found each other. Let's figure out everything else. So Carly grew up in New York. I grew up in Chicago. We both grew up obsessed with storytelling. And that showed up in terms of internships and a real passion for news and journalism and politics. So we both worked for NBC News, but how we met actually was on a study abroad trip in Rome. So we went to different schools and we wound up on the same program. We had a lot of fun in Rome. We did not talk about how, years later we were going to start a company and create this, but we did know each other. And a few years later, when we were in our early mid-20s, we were working for NBC News. By that time, we had reconnected in DC. Then we had both moved to New York and we were working at 30 Rock. We were working at different parts of NBC News. So between the two of us, we've kind of crisscrossed both NBC News, MSNBC, CNBC, long form, documentary. And we were also roommates in a very small apartment. And I think one of the things that I would say the main thing that separates entrepreneurs from people that have good ideas is doing it. And the best way to ensure that you are going to do it is to come home to someone every single day who also has the same idea. And we just talked about this. Like, we called it Project TBD. That was the name. We knew that it was never going to get easier for us to start something. That, by no means does that mean it was easy.
Right.
There was a huge amount of risk and honestly, terror, kind of an out-of-body experience, quitting our jobs that we had worked and honestly never thought that we would leave. But it was a recognition that we were at a point in our lives that the only people we had to look out for were ourselves. And that may not be and probably wouldn't be the case forever. And so let's try it now.
More from this conversation right after a quick break. And I'm curious, so you guys are co-CEOs, and was that always the plan from the beginning, or why did that make sense? Because we've gone back and forth on the show about co-CEOs versus some places it really works, some places it doesn't. Like, it is such an interesting structure. Why did that make sense for you guys?
It was always the plan. And I think one of the best pieces of advice we ever got was from a lawyer who was not even our lawyer, who we interviewed. And he said, you guys are going to need to have a prenup. We were like, what? We're not married. What are you talking about? He's like, no, you need to go get a bottle of wine and you need to talk about everything like you're creating a prenup. So we literally got a bottle of wine and we talked through everything. What happens if one of us needs to take a break? What happens if one of us, this happens and or we disagree on this, what happens? And we kind of, we talked through pretty much everything. And that was our LLC partnership agreement back when we were an LLC. And we knew that we came into this completely equal in every way that you could be equal in something, both in ideation, with finances, with workload, all of it. And that was our red line. And that actually was, again, when you look back, what are the smart decisions that we made? Thank God we were stubborn on, this was one of them. It made it really easy to not work with certain people that were would push, you're going to need to only have one of you. And the investors that we did bring on completely got why this worked. I'll say Homebrew Ventures, Sati and Hunter, have a very similar relationship to Danielle and I. They got it.
For sure.
And I think when you think about what's the magic of theSkimm and how did we get the company from where it was back then to where it is today, it is because there have been the two of us as co-CEOs. We make, now I sound like we're writing a romantic movie, but we make each other better. And I think that is the secret sauce. We get asked all the time from people looking for advice about starting a company. Give me advice on starting a company with my friend. And we're always don't do that. I think we know that it is a very rare thing that this works. I don't know how to give somebody the advice of how to make it work for them, because I think we're really lucky. But I think at this point, it's our friendship is family, and, our co-CEO relationship has made the company as strong as it is today.
And how do you guys think about dividing responsibilities, especially because as the two co-founders, you do hold the same role as co-CEOs? Is one person more focused in some areas than others, or kind of how did you guys divvy that up, if at all, or do you kind of work on everything together?
No, we did. I think the company grows in different ways, quarter over quarter, in some cases month over month, and definitely year over year. And because of that, there were stretches of time where one of us would be more focused on a single area of the business and we would divide and conquer. That does not mean that, one of us had an engineering background and the other one had an MBA. It was really, I would say, twofold. One was, what does the company need right now? What is the area and who has the time, given the other things that were going on, to tackle it? The other thing I would say is that Carly and I have different personalities and we have different ways of leading. So there have certainly been areas and periods of time where one person's approach has been better suited for the needs of a part of our organization that really needed more focus then. So that was something that we talked about. We start each week with, what are our priorities? We go through our schedule. We talk through what we need to get done at the end of the week. Does the schedule map that? And who is taking what? I think as, the company has evolved and we brought on really phenomenal leaders, it has now become much more of these are the things that we do really well together. We love brainstorming. We love working on creative direction and marketing. And that is what I think kind of has brought a certain level of magic to theSkimm. And we are lucky that we also have phenomenal leaders who are very much focused on the functional areas in the day-to-day.
And something I wanted to ask you guys about, same with me. I also work at a digital media company and have gone back and forth between print and digital media companies, my journalism career thus far. But digital media companies have had sort of a roller coaster of a time for the last decade, just the category in general. It was really hot for a while, and then people were pretty bearish on it. People have been bullish on some areas. It just hasn't been a smooth, say, up and to the right line. Not that any category actually has that, but it's definitely been a bit more of a roller coaster. And I'm curious for you guys, the space has changed so much, perception has changed so much since you guys got started. How do you guys feel you've been able to navigate it up until this point? I know you guys had layoffs last year, which is common across the space as well, but kind of like, how do you guys feel like you've been able to sort of stick around this long and lean in when the industry behind you has changed?
It's a great question. And I think as you're kind of delicately putting, and I'll say it more bluntly, like media is a disaster right now. And every industry is going through a lot of turmoil. I think media in particular is having kind of an identity crisis, if you will, because so much has changed. And I think we've been around long enough to have seen certain trends come and go. And when I look back, I'm like, what are the decisions that we made that I am so grateful we made? There were years where everyone around us, investors, advisors, peers, et cetera, were pressuring us to just go big, get as many people as possible to sign up. Stop worrying so much about your engagement and your open rates and just go big, go much bigger on the social platforms, be using, all the social platforms in a different way. And for lots of reasons, but honestly, I will, lots of very smart reasons. And then one was just a gut reason was we didn't. And I think one of the smartest things that we ever did, and I'm so grateful for, is we built with real engagement. When we say our user numbers, that's real. Those are real users that we know, we engage with, that actually read what we put out, that follow us and transact with us when it's time to make decisions in their lives. That trust that we built as a foundation is our greatest asset as a brand. And that trust has allowed us to scale beyond, here's a daily Skimm newsletter that gives you the news you need in the day, into a company that has a digital ecosystem that touches on her financial health, her wellness and mental health, her starting a family and parenting, and her purchasing decisions. And that scale has allowed us to be in a place where we can go deeper with our audience and be in a place where, we like to say we're about the calories and not the clicks. When we've seen a lot of places really struggle is that they went for the clicks. And I think that the other part of kind of having this foundation of a relationship with our audience is that, Danielle mentioned this earlier, we've been built on zero and first party data well before those were industry terms. I don't even think anybody phrased zero party data. And what that literally means is we just had a direct relationship with our audience that has allowed us to know here's how we can better serve her. And what that also means is it's insulated us a bit from a lot of things changing with third-party platforms, specifically the social media sites. And I think it also has meant that relationship is real and it's there, and it's insulated us a bit from a lot of what has affected the industry at large. So certainly we haven't been immune to ad market fluctuation and, macro trends. But I think what it has done is it has really set us up in a very strong way to have this direct engaged relationship with our audience, where we've mastered the ability of actually how to create action with her and transaction with her.
And sort of looking back at how far you guys have come so far, you've talked about a lot of good decisions you guys are happy you have made from the beginning, looking back at it now. But if you were, is there anything you would change?
Oh my gosh, so many.
If you were to say, start the company over.
That's a different podcast. Yeah.
So much. Yeah. I think that the biggest decisions, I think it's always about leadership style and the decisions that you make regarding who you work with and who you spend your time and your energy on. I think that Carly and I always have had really good gut instincts, and the times that we think about going back and redoing something, it's usually because we knew what was right and we didn't do it for whatever reason. We had a feeling, we went against it. And that shows up in dozens of different ways. But if you go back and you diagnose it, I think that that's really where a lot of the things we would redo stemmed from.
I think also, like, very tactically, it took us a long time to kind of understand this, but you should always be 6 months ahead of when you think you're going to need to hire somebody. And so I think some of our earliest leadership hires came 6 months too late. And so when I look back of like when we should have hired the C-suite team or the exec team, like we were too late on that. And those are things I would have gone back and, done at an earlier time.
And we just have time for one last question. So before we hop off today, I definitely want to know what you guys are thinking about for the future. Skimm's been around now for 12 years. What does the next 12 look like?
Well, we become the go-to source for this audience and continue to anticipate her needs. This year, we've not only been able to grow our audience offerings with our Skimm Well newsletter and parenting content, but we've also diversified our revenue streams. So we also have SKM Lab, our in-house creative agency, and Skimm Shopping, which really leans into our commerce brand. So we've grown so much in the 11 years since we've started. And I can tell you the common thread in that has been anticipating what this audience will need, looking at what's going on in all of our lives, how we are going to be affected from what's going on in systemic changes to the rise of certain technologies, looking at AI and making sure that our audience is prepared and feels like they understand the critical things that they need to know, and that we give them both the information and the confidence to make choices that are right for them.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap. So thank you so much, Danielle and Carly, for coming on the show. This was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Becca.
Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.